Good afternoon. It is still Wednesday, March 22nd. You should have in front of you voting list number 19. We have 5 bills in front of us. We are not taking them up as a consent calendar. We're going to start. I guess you guys haven't met me yet, right? Yeah, so no, some of us are hearing these things and want to have an opportunity to allow everyone to consider each bill. These are serious matters. All right, we're going to start with Nathan. Good afternoon. Thanks, Nathan.
Senate Bill 940 is a bill that was heard yesterday, and as amended and reflected in the reprint, the bill requires the Board of Pharmacy to adopt regulations to ensure that individuals who are blind, visually impaired, or otherwise print disabled have appropriate access to prescription labels, bag tags, and medical guides at no extra cost to the individual. In a format that is fully accessible to the individual and within a time frame comparable to the time frame within which the information will be provided to an individual who's not visually impaired. So it covers a fair bit of ground there. The bill further requires the board to give visually impaired individuals an opportunity to provide input on regulations and requires the regulations follow certain guidelines and recommendations issued by the U.S. Government Accountability Office. The regulations have to be adopted by January of 2025, and the Department of Health must submit a report by December of 2023 to the General Assembly on the potential process for and costs for implementing enhanced professional dispensing fees for providing accessible labels and compliant packaging. So the amendments to the bill strike the bill as introduced and implement the bill as described at the hearing yesterday. The amendments were described as the result of negotiations between the interested parties. The same amendments were adopted in the House, where the bill passed unanimously.
Thank you. Are there any questions on the amendments or the bill? Vice Chair?
There's nothing in there. They kept referring to like CVS and Walgreens and all that, but they're not mentioned in the bill. I was just trying to look real quick. I mean, the particular pharmacies were not. This is going to be for all pharmacies. Okay. Okay, thank you.
Any additional questions on the amendments or Senate Bill 940 as amended? See no questions, I'll entertain a motion.
Move favorable. Second.
Have a motion and a second for a favorable, gentlemen, can y'all join us? Okay, motion and a second for a favorable with amendments on Senate Bill 940. All those in favor, raise your hand.
Good bill, good.
That bill receives a unanimous favorable with amendments. And we're going to Patrick next. Thank you, Nathan.
Okay, Senate Bill 530. This increases the Maryland Automobile Insurance Fund's share of uninsured motorist penalties collected by the Motor Vehicle Administration. The bill also alters the assessment collection process that occurs when MAIF experiences a significant operating loss by authorizing MAIF to access certain overpayment funds that have been on the books of MAIF since the last assessment in 1989. This would enable MAIF to access about 10 million in overpayment funds without automobile insurers and their policyholders being charged for the assessment. These funds would be used first to apply towards the assessment. The second part of the bill, actually, I'll go through the amendments. You've got a reprint in front of you. So on page 3 of 9, this is the part of the bill that establishes this revised process regarding the assessment. These are clarifying amendments regarding the process of accessing these overpayment funds that have been sitting in this account. It makes clear that the MAIF Board of Directors authorizes the withdrawal of these funds when there's an assessment that's warranted. Moving on into the bill, here we have an amendment that would change the process for funding MAIF through an assessment on insurance carriers. instead of letting auto insurers impose the assessment as a surcharge on each policy, an insurer merely is allowed to recover the annual assessment as costs and rate filings. So it wouldn't show up as a line item as a surcharge when the insurer seeks to recover those costs that are imposed through an assessment, but that would be accomplished through rate filings only. And these changes also are made on the next page of the reprint. These are changes that align other parts of statute with that change in the way that carriers would be able to recoup the assessment that would be allocated to them. And then if you go to page 6 of 9, there are some amendments that conform the fund provisions to align with other provisions in the bill. Again, this is relating to the repeal of the use of the surcharge. And on the last 3 pages of the reprint, this is the part of the bill that deals with the uninsured motorist penalties that are assessed by MVA and the share of funding that MAIF gets from these penalties. And what the bill had as introduced, it would allow MAIF to get 20% of these penalties each year, which would, they currently get a share of these penalties, but by getting 20% of these penalties, that would increase the amount that they would get each year by just under $10 million. I think it's 9.9 million additional funding that would go to MAIF. And that's where the general fund impact is, because the way that the penalties are distributed, there are certain recipients of which MAIF is one, and then anything that's left over goes to the general fund. So this higher percentage of penalties that goes to MAIF has the impact on the general fund. The amendments here only authorize the additional amount of funding from those penalties to MAIF for fiscal year 2024. So it would be just in fiscal 2024 that this additional allocation of uninsured motorist penalties would go to MAIF. And then the last page just has a technical correction. There was an unnecessary inclusion of a change in cross-reference, and that just needs to be struck out of the bill.
Okay, Senator Kramer and then Senator Beidle.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I mean, if there's, I don't have a question for committee staff. I was just going to ask that there are extensive amendments, and I'm sitting here right now trying to process, it's a little challenging to do so. Could we just until tomorrow's voting session give us a chance to today or tonight read through this and get a better understanding? Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Senator Beidle.
I hope it's okay. I'll still ask a question. My question is about the assessment being part of the rate filing and not being separated. You know, for all the years previously that we used to have assessments, it would actually show on a policy MAIF assessment. And it might be a few dollars or $9, whatever it was, but it doesn't seem fair that an insurance company needs to roll it into their filings when the money's not really going to the company. It's going to this assessment for MAIF. And I don't have any problem funding MAIF. We need to keep them viable. You know, we absolutely need them as a company, but I just don't think it's fair to roll it into their filing. I don't know if anybody else has that concern. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go Senator Hershey and then Vice Chair.
I would just, if she asked for someone else that feels the same way, I would agree. I don't think that that's appropriate. If it's currently a line item already, we should keep it. If it goes up, it goes up, but people should be aware. And I don't think that insurance companies need to take on that responsibility.
Patrick, was that the amendment put the one in the House and then we took it off?
Yeah, so the House has not acted on the bill yet. So this is a change that is included in your set of amendments offered for consideration by the committee. This piece regarding the listing on the policy,
So
the surcharge.
So let me ask Senator Beidle. So when you were selling insurance, if there would be a rate increase, it would just, the assessment would be separate, it would not be rolled into. So this is different than that.
It'd actually be a line item previously.
Okay, because, and to be honest with you, when I first heard over in the house they were doing that, I was like, I don't want everybody to know that I was in on raising the rates or anything. But if that's the way it's always been done, it's been done, so.
This isn't new. It's
No.
just recently, again, the Maryland Auto Insurance Fund needs to increase their reserves. It's very important that they have the money that they need to pay the claims, but I just don't think it should be the responsibility, look like it's the responsibility of the rates from
Okay.
all the companies that
Yeah, I
contribute.
get you.
All right.
Get you. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? This bill will be held for a future voting session. Okay, we can turn to the next bill. Thanks.
Senate Bill 962. This is a bill that was heard I think yesterday. It alters the residency requirement for an alcoholic beverages license on behalf of a partnership, corporation, or club, or LLC in Anne Arundel County. The bill establishes that an individual who is a resident of the state at the time of the application satisfies the applicable residency requirement. And the license remains valid only for as long as the resident applicant remains a resident of the state.
Was the same that we did for Carol.
Correct.
Okay, so we've heard this bill before, local bill. We just did it. Okay,
Second.
have a motion and a second for a favorable on Senate Bill 962. Any questions? All those in favor, raise your hand. Senator Lamb? Yes, okay, that bill receives a unanimous favorable report. You have one more.
I do.
Okay, one more for Patrick.
A bill also heard yesterday. This bill as introduced, would establish a breast and lung cancer screening awareness program in the Maryland Department of Health. And it also would require health insurance carriers to provide coverage for breast cancer diagnosis and associated diagnostic imaging, as well as recommended follow-up diagnostic imaging to assist in the diagnosis of lung cancer. The reprint in front of you shows some amendments that have been passed out of the House, and I think reflects some input from the health department and from the insurance carriers. So I can run through the reprint for you. So the first thing is that the reprint strikes the requirement that the health department establish a new breast and lung cancer screening awareness program. And actually, if you go to the back page, uncodified language instead would have the health department conduct an assessment on current outreach, education, and health disparities in cancer screening, including the availability of biomarker testing, so that they would look at, what the existing outreach programs are, and then determine whether something additional is needed. The next amendment, if you go back to page 2, this strikes provisions requiring coverage of diagnostic imaging for breast cancer, as that's actually addressed in another bill, Senate Bill 184, Senator Bidle's bill, House Bill 376. And then if you continue on, page 4 or 5, this is the part of the bill that requires coverage of follow-up diagnostic imaging to assist in the diagnosis of lung cancer. The coverage must include ultrasound, MRI, CT, CT imaging and image-guided biopsy. And then on the last page of the bill, this would prohibit a carrier from imposing a co-payment, co-insurance, or deductible requirement on coverage for lung cancer screening and diagnosis that is greater than the co-pay, co-insurance, or deductible requirement for breast cancer screening and diagnosis. There's also an amendment here that's similar to one that we put on the other bill that provides some clarity regarding these high deductible health plans, so that it makes clear that an insured with one of these plans, they may subject follow-up diagnostic lung imaging to the deductible requirement of the high deductible health plan. And then the effective date of the bill is changed from October 1st to July 1st.
Hey, Senator Reedy, then Senator Lamb.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually, part of my questions were answered by we're chopping all this bill out, but some of it's because we already did some of this, correct? So that's with Senator Bidle's bill, which is a great bill. Does this now, though, I'm looking at all the amendments, does this mean that we're going to treat lung cancer the same as breast cancer and you can't charge above a copay? And it's just making sure you don't charge more for copays for that as a way to get around this. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, that's my reading of the bill. If I recall Senator Bidle's bill, what that does is it prohibits cost sharing for this type of diagnostic screening. So if under this bill, you can't apply a cost sharing requirement that exceeds the cost sharing limitations for those types of screenings, then you wouldn't be able to apply one here.
Good. I mean, I support the bill. I was curious about some of the amendments. We may have to eventually talk, because I had a bill in about co-insurance and copays on another issue. So I know at some point I'm wondering when these two are really important. So I'd like to know what we ought to talk about, maybe what else we ought to try to add to this. But I also know cost is a factor. But I was just curious to be sure we weren't losing. Sounds like we've got it where we need to have it. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Lamb.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a follow-up question for council is, do these amendments align it with the House version, House Bill 5815?
Yes.
They do. Okay,
Yes, they
because
do.
and so that should address the department's issues that they brought up in their letter, because it looked like they were in agreement with conforming this to the House version.
That's correct.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't see any additional questions on the amendments or Senate Bill 965.
Move favorable.
I have a motion and a second for a favorable on Senate Bill 965 as amended. All those in favor, raise your hand. That bill receives a unanimous favorable report. Thank you, Patrick. We're going to David's bill now.
The last bill on your list for today is Senate Bill 914. This concerns testing for fentanyl and overdoses that end up in the hospital. You have a reprint in front of you with amendments offered by the sponsor, which make it identical to the House bill, which is here also. And with that going over, the bill is introduced. The bill actually codifies, as I understand it, current procedures in hospitals when they're treating somebody for in an overdose classification. So you'll see with the reprint that if the individual is treated at the hospital and the hospital conducts urine drug screening to assist in diagnosing the condition, they shall also test for fentanyl. The House added amendments that say that this information shall be reported in a disaggregated function to the department through the Health Information Exchange. And it provides an exemption that if the hospital doesn't have a chemical analyzer equipment, then they're not subject to these requirements. On the back page, there was immunity provisions in the bill that said that anything in this thing does not affect current immunity provisions, and it clarifies and specifies what that is meant by. Also, there was a change in the title to the bill to be called the Josh Seams Act. And I don't know if any of you know who he is, but he was an individual who died of an overdose in a hospital, and he was part of apparently Governor Moore's campaign team.
Okay, we have before us Senator Hershey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I remember the bill hearing, but I thought that was very specific to an individual that overdosed. And then a testing was being asked for. This simply says now that if an individual is treated at a hospital and the hospital conducts a urine drug screening, then steps have to occur, right? So
Yes.
it's been reworded to conform, as I understand it, to the Hospital Association's testimony to current practice. Current practice. So this doesn't, this doesn't require a test other than they were going to perform already in the diagnosis of somebody.
Well,
right?
the requirement would be including fentanyl in individuals' in their drug screenings, looking specifically for fentanyl.
Right, but this is only now in diagnosing something,
Mhm.
right? In trying to figure out what's wrong. If they decide to do a urine drug screening, then they will add fentanyl to it, right?
Yeah, then they must screen for fentanyl in the urine drugs, in the urine drug test, drug screening.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any additional questions. You have before you amendments and a reprint of Senate Bill 914. Are there any further questions? Have a motion and a second for a favorable on Senate Bill 914 as amended. All those in favor, raise your hand. That bill receives a unanimous favorable with amendments. I believe that is the last bill that we have before us for today. So thank you all very much. Another hard day of good work. Senator Bidle.
And an amendment that my chief of staff tells me is here in the committee on my Senate Bill 962 that made it a delegation bill. And yeah. So I don't know if we can reconsider the vote and put the amendment on. I don't know how we handle that.
Okay, so without objection, we'll reconsider the vote by which we passed to Senate Bill 962, which was favorable, and we now have a sponsor amendment to change the title. It's a concept. No, I'm just kidding. So to change the sponsors of the bill. Is everybody clear on what we're voting on? So the amendment before you is the Anne Arundel Senate delegation. So any objection to the amendment? Okay, so you now have before you 962 favorable with amendments and yes.
So there's such a thing as the Anne Arundel Senate delegation, but there's not really such a thing as an Eastern Shore Senate delegation. Is that my understanding? Is that correct? There is no such thing there, but okay, thank you for the
Senator.
clarification.
The long day. All right, Senator Mounts is.
Just as many members of the Eastern Shore delegation as the. Anne
Y'all are
Arundel
killing me.
delegation.
Y'all are killing me.
Can I just say one thing?
Sure, you can say something. Why
I'm
not?
gonna say something, you know what, in the Senate Finance, there's 11 of us. Okay, so we got that straight, but I need money from.
Oh, can we finish? We're in the middle of a roll. Right
Oh,
now.
I forgot.
And we're still live. Can we finish? Hello, so we have Senate Bill 962 as amended. All those in favor, raise your hand. Seeing no opposition, that bill receives a unanimous favorable report. That concludes the voting session. We will now go offline.